Are we done? We've got 9 councillors, including me. Oh no, 3, 7, 8. Yeah. Okay, 7 o'clock. Do we have to wait to go live or? Right, good evening. Welcome to the Planning Committee for Wednesday the 19th of May 2021. Coming live from Victoria Hall. We have a real meeting tonight, not a virtual meeting, although it's being streamed live. Right, I'm going to ask the councillors to introduce themselves from my right to left, as the name badges are not easily discernible from the public gallery, and I'm sure not from the camera either. So, John.
I'm Councillor John Ball from Ealing Common Ward.
Councillor Fabio Conti from Hanger Hill.
Councillor Anthony Young from Ealing Broadway Ward.
Councillor Simon Woodruff from Greenford Green. I think I'm a substitute for this meeting.
And I'm Councillor Miriam Rice from Northolt Mandeville. Thank you.
Councillor D. Martin from Northolt West End.
Councillor Tariq Mahmood from Perryville.
All right, okay, thank you very much, everyone. So there are no apologies for absences apart from the people that were originally on the Planning Committee who had to step down because of their cabinet portfolios. So Councillor Chitel Munro, Councillor Aisha Raza and Councillor Lauren Moore had to step down off the committee. That's why it's a smaller committee than normal tonight.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say that Councillor Dabrowska sent her apologies?
Sorry,
We've
yeah.
got Councillor Young as
Yes,
a substitute. Yeah, okay, thank you.
So, okay, I don't believe, so that's the substitutions and absences, apologies. No urgent matters that I'm aware of this evening. Any declarations of interest? None declared. No, any matters to be considered in private? I'm not aware of any. Okay. Minutes of the last meeting. So we have to prove the correct record of the meeting of the 31st of March and the 21st of April 2021. For those that were present or were watching, have we got any objections to the minutes, or do we approve them? Okay, I'll take they're agreed. Thank you. So note site visit attendance. So hopefully in the near future, we will get back to site visits post June the 21st or whenever we are allowed to. So, Councillor Ball.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to ask about that, what the plan is for resuming, sorry, still one is, what the plan is for resuming site visits, because obviously most of it happens outdoors and it wouldn't be beyond the wit of man to hire a slightly larger minibus so that the transit between them is safe enough. So I just wondered how soon we would be able to restart, because they are very useful for the committee members.
I agree they're useful for committee members, and I'm sure a lot of the committee have missed them and missed making decisions without having that information. But I don't see us moving towards it before June the 21st until restrictions are completely gone. If it is June the 21st, and that's debatable at the moment. So I have no more information for you, Councillor Ball, having been thrust into the chair this evening. From not knowing I was going to be a chair this morning. So I have no more detail than that, unless you've got any.
No, Chair, that's correct. I think it would be unwise to jump the gun before the guidance obviously has changed. And I think the Chair is correct in stating June the 21st is the date when we're all hoping that there will be a further liberalisation, although that cannot be guaranteed because it will be subject to the government's further tests being met. But certainly officers will be talking to the Chair about future arrangements. And as soon as we can obviously get back to business as usual, I'm sure everybody will welcome that.
Apologies, I didn't introduce myself as the chair, Ray Wall from Hobbayne Ward. Okay, so we have two items in front of us tonight. I'm proposing to take the second as the first and the first as the second. So Hanson Gardens, land between Hanson Gardens and Lewis Road first, because we have speakers for those. We have three speakers, an objector, an applicant, and one of the local ward councillors. So Tiago, would you like to, oh, it's John, is it? John, would you like to introduce the application, please?
Thank you. This application is to redevelop a narrow backland site which is overgrown and contains derelict former education buildings. It lies to the rear of dwellings on Hanson Gardens, Beaconsfield Road and Lewis Road, with narrow gated entrances from Hanson Gardens, which the slide should just about show. This is a minor residential development brought to the planning committee at councillor request. 9 dwellings are proposed, 3 single-storey houses, 4 two-storey houses, and 2 flats and a 2-storey building, with only 3 car parking spaces. Next slide, please. All the proposed dwellings would exceed minimum London plan floor space sizes, would be dual aspect, and receive adequate light and outlook. All would have private amenity space, which on balance is considered to be adequate in size and quality. A hotel on this site was recently rejected on appeal, mainly because the noise and disturbance from the hotel activity would harm the amenity of nearby residential properties. However, the inspector did not reject the principle of built development on this site. And the proposal is also not considered to result in a loss of social infrastructure premises, because evidence is provided that the derelict buildings have been vacant for a considerable time, something like 25 years, and the former education use has been abandoned. The proposed buildings would be between 1 and 2 stories in height and lower than surrounding residential properties. The existing derelict buildings cover 66% of the site, and the proposal would reduce this coverage by almost half. Density is not high, and the proposal is not obviously overdevelopment of the site. Next slide, please. The proposed units would have flat roofs and a contemporary design, with the massing across the site reduced by gaps between buildings. While the elevations are considered rather bland, in our view, this development would be barely visible from any public areas, would have no significant impact on the street scene, and is considered acceptable. Also, the scale and height of these buildings would be broadly similar to the hotel buildings in the recent appeal. The appeal inspector concluded that these single and 2-storey hotel buildings would have an attractive contemporary design, would be largely hidden from public views, and screened by buffer landscaping and outbuildings and adjoining rear gardens. So he considered these buildings would not adversely affect the character and appearance of the area. Similar considerations apply to the current scheme. There are objections by 30 individual residents and a petition signed by 28 residents and 2 councillors. A late objection was also received from Ealing Civic Society. The issues raised include closeness to adjoining properties, loss of privacy, overdevelopment of a backland site, increased traffic, access for emergency services, and increased parking pressures on Hanson Gardens. However, the development we consider is not going to have unacceptable impacts on the amenity of adjoining occupiers in terms of overlooking, overbearing effects, or impacts on daylight. due to the separation distances from nearby dwellings, the low scale of the proposed dwellings, the position and orientation of the windows, and the screening effect of boundary trees and outbuildings. Next slide, please. A daylight sunlight assessment also concluded that very limited effect on daylight would arise to neighbouring dwellings, and negligible reductions in sunlight or overshadowing of adjoining rear gardens. Access to the site is going to be via an existing access road with a turning head to allow for refuse emergency vehicles to turn. Despite objections on inadequate access for emergency vehicles, the width of the access road is considered adequate by transport officers, and swept path analysis diagrams demonstrate adequate access is possible for such vehicles. Since only 3 parking spaces are proposed, no significant traffic impacts on the local road network should arise. There are some objections that occupants would need to park in Hanson Gardens. However, a Section 106 agreement would prevent occupants obtaining resident parking permits. And this, with the site having good public transport accessibility, should limit potential parking pressures. The proposal incorporates various sustainability measures, and potential impacts with regard to air quality, noise, and land contamination can be adequately dealt with by the conditions proposed. Overall, the scheme will provide some planning benefits, including an increase in the housing stock and regeneration of a site which is currently overgrown and occupied by derelict buildings. No factors have been identified which are sufficient to justify refusal, and as such, it's recommended for approval, subject to Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, we have an objector, Chatham Mitra. We've got 3 minutes, and you will get a warning at 30 seconds out from 3 minutes, and we will stop you speaking at 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I speak on behalf of the 30 signatories of the petition mentioned by Mr. Robertson, references I make to the reporter to his report. The report contains the following fundamental errors. Access. At page 16, the report says the width of access is measured as 3.3 metres, more than the minimum 3.25 metres required for such vehicles. Please see photos at Appendix 1 of my submission, where we have measured the width of the access as 3.17 metres, which does not meet the minimum requirements of 3.25. Change of social use. The inspector, as Mr. Robertson mentioned, dealt with social use, change of social use. At paragraph 16 of his decision dated 29th April 2021, he stated, under LP policy S1, redundant social infrastructure should be considered for full or partial use or other forms of social infrastructure before alternative developments are considered. Paragraph 17 says there is no submitted evidence such as needs assessment to demonstrate whether any social infrastructure could be provided on this site, and the proposal does not comply with LP policy S1 and there is a conflict with it. Paragraph 25 concludes, furthermore, harm would arise from the failure to demonstrate that social infrastructure could not be developed on the site. In his report, Mr. Robertson says, and at page 11, that applicants have provided evidence that the buildings are currently derelict, have been vacant for a considerable time, and that the former education use can be considered to be abandoned. It does not appear that this later information was available to the appeal inspector. Based on relevant case law, this argument appears reasonable, and on that basis, the planning officer's interpretation is that LP policy S1 does not apply in these circumstances. The relevant documents in this case are 2, 3, and 4 of the applicant's December 2020 planning statement. Both documents 2 and 3 were presented to the inspector as documents 2 and 3 of the July 2020 planning statement. Therefore, the report is wrong when it says the inspector did not have the relevant information. Document 4 is verbatim the same case law relating to abandonment that was cited at paragraph 4.6 of the 2020 July planning statement. Again, therefore, the report is wrong when it says the inspector did not have the relevant information. The inspector had exactly the same information as in this case, but the planning department is coming to the exact opposite conclusion. We, along with the Ealing Civic Society, have always said that this site is ideally suited for social use. The council should not readily agree to redesignation without a thorough needs assessment.
30 seconds remaining.
Lack of required amenity space. Page 16 of the report states that 4 of the 9 units, almost half of the development, do not meet the policy 7D requirements for amenity space. 1 unit fails to provide even half the required space. This clearly illustrates the land is not suitable for such a development. The applicant is cramming as many units as possible into a constrained backland site without triggering social housing provision. Parking. The Parking Beat survey shows 90% utilisation outside CPZ hours and 100% utilisation of pay-by-phone spaces. Development not having parking permits will not prevent residents parking
Time is
outside
up.
CPZ hours. So I've just got literally 2 sentences, if that's it. Thank you. Will not prevent residents parking outside CPZ hours when parking spaces are hardest to find. We would not support an increase in CPZ operational hours. The development is seeking to remove a parking space on Hanson Gardens, which will exacerbate the issues we face with parking on the road. It's for those reasons that we say that the committee has no option but to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitra. We have for the applicant, Kate Matthews. Again, 3 minutes, and if should you run over by 2 seconds, I will allow that.
Okay, I shouldn't do, thank you. My name's Kate Matthews, of First Plan, and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant this evening. The site under consideration is a derelict backland site, the rear of Hanson Gardens and Lewis Road, and is within the Southall Opportunity Area. It was formerly in use by Southall Community College, but has been vacant for over 25 years. The buildings have fallen into disrepair, and the site now presents a great opportunity for regeneration. In respect of the existing use, we have demonstrated within our submission that the existing use has been abandoned, and this is supported by case law. This evidence was not considered in the recent appeal decision, and the appeal decision is clear that is the design and access statement which the inspector has considered, and not the evidence within the submitted planning statement. The reason for refusal of the hotel scheme was not in relation to the loss of the social use of the site, and therefore during the appeal the loss of the use only came up in the very last minute, and that caused confusion, it appears, with which documents the inspector was considering. The site is ideally suited for residential development, and the optimisation of brownfield sites such as this is supported at policy levels in the London Plan and local plan. The existing buildings on the site are a mix of 2 stories with pitched roof and single story, and the scheme represents a reduction in footprint, and with flat roofs, it's a reduction in height. The variety of proposed single story and 2-story detached buildings with flat roofs and the gaps between them break up the massing. The primary driver of the design was the views into the site, and therefore the landscaping has taken precedence. This includes green walls, green roofs and brown roofs, as well as the gardens. The planting will add visual interest and complements the simple contemporary design of the buildings. The detailings will be of high quality, and both the applicant and architect are well experienced in delivering schemes of this scale in used locations. The layout has been designed so there's no direct overlooking into neighbouring properties, and the scheme provides a high standard of accommodation. With regard to parking, the scheme is supported by a transport statement by TTP and includes sweat path analysis and a parking survey finding the amount of parking acceptable.
30 seconds remaining.
The new occupiers will not be eligible for parking permits, and therefore parking on surrounding streets will not be impacted on. This approach is in line with policy and recognises that this is a highly accessible location, a short walk from Southall Station and various bus routes. Overall, we urge you to support the scheme, which will provide high quality homes which respect the amenity of their neighbours and bring this derelict site back into use.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have the ward councillor, Councillor Johan, who wishes to speak and has 5 minutes to speak, and I'd stress up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Councillor Wall. So I understand it's unusual for planning committee to deal with comparatively small developments. But I hope you will all bear in mind the importance of scrutinizing this application, given the sheer scale, height, and density of building that's taking place in Southall, in already very heavily congested areas, I may add. I've often heard criticism that planning applications in Southall don't receive engagement. Well, here we have a very engaged group of residents who have spent a lot of time and effort in scrutinizing this application to engage with the planning process. And they have picked out a crucial flaw in the plan, which is the incorrect measurement of the only access to the backland site. The application states that the minimum required access is 3.25 meters, but as Mr. Mitra has highlighted with photos, this access measures 3.17 meters curb to curb and 3.23 meters wall to wall. Importantly, both these measurements are below safe requirements for refuse vehicles, not and this is not stated in the report. Moreover, the report suggests that the same alley can be used to facilitate waste collection by, I quote, dragging bins up to a suitable collection point at the end of the access road by the highway. This does not seem appropriate at all for the site, given it will inevitably lead to obstacles in the only access way to the site. An already small access will experience clutter from refuse bins, potentially blocking access for emergency vehicles, and also blocking right-of-way for cars that are parking on site. This will also lead to obstacles on the public highway, which contravenes the council's SLR. And during the last 3 years in office, I've constantly received a high volume of casework related to fly tipping and SLR breaches in terms of bins being left on the public highway. I cannot count the number of times the council's own officers have stated poor refuse facilities in new builds and flats as a cause for these problems. And I have no reason to believe this will be any different. The application also has insufficient mitigation measures against increased parking pressures in the area. The nearby Southall Waterside site was also a zero-car development, but again, I've received numerous casework from newly arrived residents complaining about the lack of parking available to them. Undeterred, many continue to use CPZ spaces after hours. And again, this has been confirmed to me by the high level of casework received from residents living on Beaconsfield Road, which is adjacent to Hanson Gardens. And contrary to the council's argument, zero-car builds are not encouraging a modal shift. They are increasing tensions in Southall and between existing and new residents. I would also like to follow up on the argument that new evidence was provided, leading to the conclusion that there is no legal requirement for the site to be used for social infrastructure. On numerous occasions, this committee has heard me repeat almost on loop the fact that Southall is being turned into a commuter hub, filled with one-bedroom apartments and with little to no social infrastructure that's matched to keep up with this change. For this reason, it's unpalatable that further assessments on social use have not been undertaken, particularly in the context of dense development in the area. We're building more homes, but losing the possibility to grow our social infrastructure. Our local hospitals being gutted of services, our schools remain underfunded, classroom sizes large, and our police station has been closed. All these factors contribute to a poorer quality of life for Southall, adding to high levels of structural inequality. Yet this report believes that there is no need for further social use on the site and the space should be converted to more homes. I ask a simple question: when will a full equalities impact be undertaken regarding the erosion of social infrastructure in Southall and its replacement with homes that are not genuinely affordable, as is demonstrated by this case? I would also emphasize a problematic conclusion in the report regarding air quality. Not once does the report make reference to the air quality concerns related to the bordering Southall Waterside site. Residents at the boundary of Southall Waterside have suffered greatly because of poor air quality, and this construction site condemns them to this further due to construction. We must do everything to keep our air cleaner, including considering how construction contributes to this. Any developers approaching Southall should show sensitivity to this fact by clearly outlining their plans for air quality monitoring during construction and after. And with this in mind, the applicant should be required to monitor air quality, another gaping omission in the plan.
30 seconds remaining.
Furthermore, these properties will not benefit residents in Southall. People here need social rents, not more market price properties. It's important to note that these undoubtedly expensive homes, which will not help people most in need in Southall, do not have sufficient amenity space. Instead of proposing fewer buildings or homes, a planning application simply accepts the shortcomings of the plan and the reduced lack of the amenity space. The same resigned attitude is evident in not pushing for changes in the design of the buildings. The fact the buildings aren't visible from the street seems like a lazy excuse to ensure the best design outcome. I've got one last sentence. Southall residents are fatigued, tired, and apathetic about their concerns remaining unheard. I hope the committee will seriously consider our reservations. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Johan. Okay, would the officer like to come back on several of those points? The access width, the change of use, parking, refuse blocking, affordable homes, air quality things, and the inspector's appeal documentation.
Sure. Right here. On the access width, well, the width was measured by our transport officer and assessed on that basis. I'm not sure whether he measured from the plans or carried out a site inspection. We'd have to verify whatever measurement was made by the residents to make sure that it is accurate. But as I say, our transport officer assessed the width and concluded that it was fine for the purpose. In addition, the applicant has actually submitted swept path analysis for a range of emergency and refuse vehicles, including a small refuse vehicle, and that seems to work fine. These have been assessed by a transport officer. So the access does seem to be adequate for a range of emergency and refuse vehicles. On the point about the social infrastructure use, well, I think as has been said, the applicant has submitted evidence that the site has been vacant for 25 years or more. The buildings, there's a structural report saying the buildings are derelict and unusable and unsafe. It's clearly overgrown. There's been no proposal by the previous owners to resurrect the education use. And these all meet the tests defined by case law in a number of cases for a site being abandoned, in which case there's no legal requirement to apply the London plan policy about loss of social infrastructure premises. So it's not a question of whether we want to apply it or interpret it. There is no legal requirement to do that. On amenity space, I didn't quite agree with some of the comments made about I think one unit having less than half the required amenity space size. I couldn't figure out which unit that was because I can't find one. Most of the units, at least 1, 2, 3, 4 of them actually have more than 50 square meters. Several others are just under 50 square meters, and some make 50 square meters when you include the other things like courtyards and so on. So I'd probably point out that policy 7D gives a figure of 50 square meters as a typical size of garden. It's not a minimum requirement. It's not an absolute requirement. It's something we'd aim for. And on a tight urban site like this, it's quite reasonable to show a bit of flexibility. So we think these gardens are quite usable, get adequate light and quite reasonable sizes. The point about what the appeal inspector said about the social infrastructure use, he may well have had the information about that available to him if it was one of the appeal documents. I wouldn't like to comment on whether he saw it or not. Perhaps he overlooked it, but it seems very strange that he didn't comment on quite important evidence that was put before him when he did comment on all the other evidence. But in any case, in our professional view, there's no real doubt that the case law does point to this being an abandonment of use, or whatever the inspector said about it. Let's see if there's any other points. On the design, of the buildings, we didn't think they were great, but we did try and get the applicant to amend them. They rejected that, and we didn't feel that the design was such that we had grounds to refuse it. On air quality, the site has been assessed by our quality officer. We didn't object to it, as long as we apply various conditions about fresh air ventilation. So that's the evidence. That's the expertise that we rely on to make our assessment. And on the refuse collection, well, I think the applicants have said they would use a small refuse vehicle. Our waste department has looked at that and said that's quite an acceptable way of doing things. So we couldn't really see anything actually wrong with that. So I think that's all the points I have.
Okay, thank you, John. A couple of questions from myself, and we'll move on. One is right at the beginning about the width of the access. Did I hear you correct that we're not sure whether it was measured or whether it was off plan, the measurement taken? And second question, Councillor Johan mentioned about the refuse access being blocked by bins, to wheeling the bins down the road. Is that correct, or is it? Did you just say that there was a smaller refuse vehicle that will go up this access road to collect the bins?
On the width of the access, I measured it myself from the plan. Our transport officer also assessed it. I'm not sure whether he measured from the plan or went down to the site and measured it himself. But either way, we came to a view on the width of it as best we could. We haven't been down since because of lockdown, obviously. So that's as much as we know about how it was measured. On the bins, there is a turning head within the site, and the applicants have provided a swept path analysis to show that a small refuse vehicle can go up the access road, turn it in the turning head, and collect rubbish which have been wheeled to that area. And our waste department think that's an acceptable way forward on it.
Thank you. So am I putting up to questions from the rest of the committee? And I've got Councillor Mahmood first.
Thank you, Chair. The three quick things, I just wanted to know the clarification. One is the three issues here, the narrow access to the proposed development, one, and we are all concerned about that. Second is parking, and I presume is a high petal rate. So just wanted to know what grade is that in terms of petal rate. And third thing is very concerned about the right of way to the rear of the Hanson Gardens dwelling. So I think it should have been sorted out between residents and applicant before they put the planning application. So I would be happy if you clarify that.
Okay, well, the PTAR rating for the site is 3. It may well improve with when the Crossrail station opens, but it's 3 at the moment, which is kind of moderate level. On the parking, well, I guess we've said that there's going to be a Section 106 agreement to restrict residents' parking permits, which should limit the parking pressures. I think the current parking permit hours are between 10 and 6, so between 10 and 8 in this CPZ. So which would prevent most occupants who don't have a residence parking permit from fully parking there pretty much all of the day. And I think the parking survey the applicants provided actually showed there were some spaces, at least within the within the parking permit bays. So I can't really see this too much of a problem with that. There are obviously going to be 3 parking spaces within the site. With it as 9 dwellings, I mean, that would potentially another 6 people could have a car, but doesn't seem a huge amount for the area as a whole, especially if they don't have resident parking permits. On the right-of-way issue, well, I guess we haven't really considered that too much. It's not really a planning issue for us to deal with. I mean, as you say, it's a legal matter that has to be sorted out between the residents and the developer. So I can't really add very much on that.
Okay, thank you. I'll take Councillor Rice next.
Thank you, Chair. I will ask again about the access issue, because one other point that comes to my mind is, especially these days, I think quite regularly, people use supermarket delivery services, And so that's going to be one issue of the van. Could it be, we could have a number of vans turning up every week and potentially parking on pavements, which often happens, causing damage to pavements, and that causes another issue. So it does actually, another thing that does make me a little bit nervous about this idea of this access and the provision that we've made available. And the other thing that now, the other point that's come up actually from the discussion just now, is that I am aware of how difficult it is. Let's say if you have a missed collection and you report it to the council and ask for the collection to be made because of a missed collection, it's simply not possible to send out refuse services on a special trip in order to pick up your missed collection, and so it can be very difficult to get that seen to. So it really does actually seem quite, I mean, the mind boggles as to how on earth we can provide a service where we're going to have a smaller vehicle that's going to make a special trip just for these few homes. That's what it sounds like. It simply doesn't sound feasible to me. I really can't believe it's going to work in reality. So that's just really my point on that one, if there's an answer to that at all, but that's my view.
Well, on the first point about the supermarket delivery vans, I think the applicants actually, in their transport statement provided, I've mentioned the sweat path analysis, they did cover a number of van sizes. I don't know whether that would cover the typical type of van used by supermarkets, but certainly some vans would have access to that site. That's probably as much as I can say on that. On the refuse point, I think the applicants have made clear they're planning to have a private refuse collections done, so it wouldn't be reliant on the council doing it. The private refuse provider would use their own small vehicle, and so they should have access to the site, and it wouldn't rely on the council to do anything on it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Young, next.
Thank you. I was just seeking some clarification on the parking spaces. On page 17 of the report, it talks about having 3 car parking spaces, one being disabled, one being passive electric charging, and one being presumably part of the CPZ. I just wondered what the difference was between passive and active charging, because you were saying one should be an active. And also I'm having difficulty in reconciling the report on page 22, where the conditions talk about 3 electric car charging points, 1 active and 2 passive, which presumably would remove the disabled bay.
Well, no, I think the London plan requirement is that one space should be active and all the rest should be passive, and we put a condition on to ensure that. Active means actually having the infrastructure in place so they can be used right away to charge electric vehicles. Passive means it would have provision for that infrastructure to be put in place at a future date if it's required. So that's what we've asked for to be done in the condition.
Sorry, but the condition would that take out the disabled parking bay?
The disabled parking space could have electric charging facilities in it. There's nothing stopping it having that and being a disabled space at the same time. And some people might actually want that.
Okay. Councillor Cod next.
Thank you. Just back onto the access road. Because obviously clearly there's a discrepancy between the sort of reading that the residents have made and what the planning officers have measured. If the measurement is incorrect and let's say the residence one is correct, will that make a material difference to whether there is access to that site or adequate access to that site, given the discrepancy in the measurements? My second point I just wanted to ask was about the massing on the site itself. I know in the report it says, I think it reduces. Currently, the building coverage is 66%. I think it goes down to 37%. And it talks about the measurements of what the new buildings, the distance they're going to be to the current properties that are there. But are any of the buildings that are being proposed closer to the borders of the other residential homes than the current buildings that are there on the site now? Because I couldn't see the reporting if there's any comparison. Are they the same? Are they going to be any closer to the other residential units.
On the first point about the access, even if the width is what the residents have measured it as, I think we're relying on this swept path analysis in the transport statement, which shows that with the access as it is, a range of vehicles of different sizes can get in to the site and turn. So I'm not sure how material that the actual width is, as long as that swept path analysis shows these vehicles can get in and out of the site. So that was that point. I'm just looking to see how close the existing buildings are.
Sorry, just on that though, but isn't those swept path analysis based on that figure? So if that figure ends up, let's say that's incorrect, wouldn't that make those swept path analysis invalid because they would be based on a different measurement?
The swept path analysis is based on the drawings which have been submitted, and these show the access, the lines of the access, and they also show the width of the vehicle path going in through it. So as long as that swept path analysis show a reasonable gap on either side, whatever the width is, it works. And unless that swept analysis is wrong, but I mean, our transport officer has looked at them and thinks they're okay. So I'm just looking at this diagram. I find it quite hard to tell how different the existing buildings on site are in terms of separation from adjoining buildings or dwellings are from the ones. There doesn't look much difference to me. It doesn't look like they're any closer. And some I would have thought probably are slightly further away. But there's a lot less of them and they don't have any windows facing the existing dwellings. And they're also fairly low as well.
Councillor Ball, next.
Thank you. Yeah. So firstly, the inspector accepted the principle of built development on the site. Sorry, we've got some bit of interference. But that was in the context of different buildings for the hotel. Could we hear more about the differences between the hotel buildings proposed and the residential buildings proposed? Particularly, I mean, I note that the inspector said that the hotel buildings were of good quality, whereas the officers admitting that the residential buildings proposed here are not particularly good. Second thing was the point about provision of social infrastructure. It seems that the response is relying on case law about abandonment of use, but I mean, just looking that up, I see that the case law varies, and there's at least one case where 40 years of disuse was found not to be abandonment of use. So it seems that that's a very nebulous concept in planning law. It'd probably be helpful to get a legal view on that. So it doesn't seem that, generally we don't try to second guess the planning inspectors. We tend to go by what the planning inspectors say. So if the planning inspector is saying that there should be consideration of a social use rather than a residential use on the site, shouldn't we be taking that more seriously? And then finally, a couple of points on conditions. The first one's on air quality. So would it be possible to add a condition, as Councillor Chauhan suggested, in terms of air quality monitoring, given the obvious concerns in the area about the gasworks scheme? And finally, could condition 5 be clarified to certainly reading that condition, it wasn't clear to me what the officer said subsequently, that what's intended is that there'll be refuse collection by means of a private collection scheme in perpetuity. So if that's what's considered to be a requirement for this scheme, shouldn't that be spelt out rather more clearly than just the details of a refuse management plan? Thank you.
So John, if you want to answer the questions that for you, and I'll bring out.
Right, you. On the point about the design of the hotel, I do actually have the drawings of the hotel with me, but from memory, I didn't think they were all that dissimilar to the buildings here. I think there's probably more of them, and I think they're all slightly higher, because these are mainly 1- and 2-story dwellings, whereas I think there was more 2-story buildings for the hotel and a higher site coverage. In terms of design, they had flat roofs. They were it was a quite contemporary design. I'm not sure it was such a different type of design from what the inspector seemed to think was acceptable. So I guess from our view on that was similar considerations should probably apply. On the point about the social infrastructure, well, I suppose our view is that the inspector was provided with quite a lot of evidence on the abandonment of use, and he just didn't comment on it at all, which made me just think either he hadn't seen it or I'm not quite sure what, because he certainly commented on all the other evidence on the social infrastructure point. But reading case law, the most recent cases, there's several tests for abandonment. One is the length of vacancy. One is the condition of the site. One is the intentions of the owner and whether there's been any intervening uses in between the former use and the current use. And in terms of all these criteria, we think the site actually meets them. These seem to be the most accepted criteria for abandonment. So that was our view. We thought it met it pretty well. On the conditions, I'd have to talk to our air quality officer about having a monitoring one. I wasn't sure though. It's quite a small site with only 9 dwellings. I wasn't sure whether the condition of that nature would be appropriate and necessary for that kind of development. On the point about the refuse management condition, I think we just put that in so that the developer could clarify their intentions. What they've said in the planning statement is they're going to have a private refuse contractor delivering and collecting the rubbish. So we just put a condition in to make sure that actually happens, and they can provide us the details and we can approve them. So that's why it's as it is.
Yeah, just on the issue of abandonment, I think John has touched on some of these things, but there's a number of factors that would be taken into account when deciding whether or not a use has been abandoned. One would be whether or not the pre-existing use could be resumed. Another length of time is one consideration, but there's also things like the condition of the buildings on the site, whether there's been any other intervening uses. I think the key point here is that the objectors to the application are saying that the planning inspector considered the issue of abandonment and decided that the use hadn't been abandoned and therefore that policy S1 needed to be brought into play. The applicant is saying that that issue was not considered by the inspector, and that there's been a misunderstanding about the documentation that was actually considered. So I don't think it's possible for you as a planning committee to adjudicate on whether or not the use has been abandoned. I think there's obviously a number of factors that go into play, and the planning officer has considered issues like the state of the buildings on the site and the length of time, which I think has been about 25 years since any educational use was taking place, and has concluded on balance that that use had been abandoned. But it's not a straightforward issue to determine.
Thank you, Alison. I've got two more showing. Councillor Woodruff.
Well, so that's all quite interesting as whether we should be, so we shouldn't really be taking that into account about the abandonment. So, but I mean, presumably it may be taken further by other parties, which may negate if we granted it planning, it might be negated by further legal. Is that what might happen?
I think you can, because you'd be thinking about whether or not the fact that an alternative social infrastructure type use hasn't been considered prior to this housing application being put before you. You'd have to consider whether or not that it would be a reason for you to refuse this application, and you would give some weight to the conflicting arguments about whether or not that use had been abandoned, and therefore the applicant was entitled just to say, well, no, that's fine, I don't need to take that into consideration. So really it's a balancing, but if you were going to take that into account, you'd have to be satisfied that there was sufficient controversy around the issue to say, yes, we're going to refuse this, because they really should have considered policy S1 and examined alternative uses prior to putting a residential application in.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested about the private refuse. I mean, I'm presuming if the residents, there aren't many, not a huge amount of residents, they're going to be paying some sort of service charge to provide for the private refuse. Is that what's going to happen? That's just a question. I was just going to say one. I mean, I just think this whole case has proved the case of the usefulness of site visits. I think it would have been very useful if everybody had got a site visit, so that because you're looking at a map and you're thinking, oh, that does look quite small. I don't know whether it is. I'd like to actually go there, and I'd like to go with a tape measure and stuff like that. I can't help thinking that the ideal thing would be to delay this until we'd had a site visit and then come back and we'd all be better. This is my last planning committee meeting, so I'm just so I wouldn't be going on it. But I do think that is so. I think this whole case is getting more and more complicated as we go along. I mean, the basic thing is we have officers who we have to depend on them, because they're paid experts, that we're lay people, and so we normally have to go along by what our officer says. There's also been an appeal. We know that you just chuck it out for no reason, then the developers will take it to an appeal, and if we lose it, we have to pay large amounts of money. And there's already been an appeal, so there is evidence, there's case evidence for it. So I think that makes the whole thing quite difficult. So I very much see two sides of this. I think it is very difficult. I notice it's called backland. I can remember when we would never build on backland. It was a sort of things have obviously changed over the years. So I kind of, I mean, my preferred thing was to sort of suggest we have a site visit, but probably wouldn't be able to have a site visit till July, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, the question was really about the refuse. I mean, is that what they're going to do, is pay a service charge, or how are they going to pay for a private refuse?
They haven't given us any details of that, I'm afraid. That's the reason we put the condition for a refuse management plan to be approved on, so we can get that information.
Right, the last, second last, I've just seen another hand go up. Councillor Rice again.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think Councillor Woodruff hit the nail on the head there, because I was actually concerned about a service charge. Now I've had a chance to think about that. The fact that this really hasn't been, now we learn it's not really been put in stone as to what's going to happen. It does actually leave me a little bit concerned that maybe the residents might actually end up being dumped in it and have to end up having to use council services, which aren't going to really be sufficient. But also, I mean, just looking at the report again here, it is talking about potential for bins to have to be dragged out to a certain point in order to be collected in the first place, which will create issues of how easy is that going to be to drag back and forth, especially if like a resident is having difficulty maybe due to mobility issues, and also because it could be quite some distance. And then you've got the other issues of other bins going to create obstructions to emergency vehicles, especially if they have to come after dark and can't really see exactly what the situation is. And so, so that's a really good concern that I have on that. And also about the site visits, that's the one thing I was thinking about actually looking at this. And I'm complaining about it pretty much every meeting, but we really do need to see, because at this stage, I can't really see how this is going to work, especially since I haven't had a site visit. So that's where I'm just at the moment. Thank you.
Anything we need?
Well, I'm not quite sure what more I can add on that. All I can say is our waste and street services section have looked at the proposal and they seem to think it will work okay. That's all the details we have on it. So I'm not quite sure how much further what more I can add to that.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. So when I read this myself, I think I put a lot of weight on what the inspector had said about the hotel and the fact that it seemed to me they'd already effectively accepted the principle that something of that sort of nature could be built on the site, but not a hotel because of the antisocial aspects of 24-hour, etc. of that. As we've gone on this evening, I'm now a bit confused about what the inspector did or didn't consider, whether the inspector was saying that we should have looked at alternative uses before we looked at putting housing on it. And I suppose my question is, can we not find that out? I mean, surely this is a matter of public record, what the inspector did or didn't consider. And I think if we can't find it out tonight, then I would agree with people that I think maybe we should defer, and we might be able to at the same time clarify a lot of these issues about the width of the access route by actually going on a site visit.
So before the office, I'm picking up the committee are looking for a site visit on this one and some further clarification of what the inspector said or didn't say.
But presumably we could get a copy of, if we're going to wait for a site visit, and we could actually get a copy of that report, couldn't we? I mean, that must be available. So I would, if it comes back to the committee again, I would suggest providing a copy of the report to members of the committee.
Okay, so the dilemma I think we have is that it'd be very easy to have a site visit, plan one and come to the next committee or the one after that. The dilemma we have is we have to determine, I believe, within a certain amount of time. Do we have time if June the 21st opens up for site visits, to have a site visit and determine this in the required time limit?
Well, the applicants are already gone well over the initial 8-week period for determination. So unless the applicant is willing to agree on time extension.
I don't think that's fair to put the applicant on the spot in front of the committee tonight. Maybe you'd like to say something, Steve?
Yeah, I do understand the dilemma the committee faces here. This is actually quite a tricky application. I think we would all agree that as a derelict site, which has been derelict for more than a quarter of a century, it's clearly beneficial that we see some development come forward on this site. I think it's already been pointed out, it's a backland development site. These are, sorry, I say this, I can't talk. developing a backland development site with the constraints of access, etc., are always more challenging than a normal development site. So, you know, that makes the difficulties that we're grappling with here more acute. But there is no doubt in my mind that a residential development on this site would be appropriate. I agree with the planning inspector. I think a hotel, for all the reasons that have been mentioned, would almost certainly have been inappropriate, and that was the reason for the appeal being refused. The question then is whether or not some other alternative form of development should also be considered. It would have been helpful to have had an assessment in front of the committee to determine whether or not some form of social infrastructure use might have been appropriate, notwithstanding the argument that's already been presented about whether it's abandoned or redundant. My computer's just died just when I wanted to refer to it. My own view is that an educational use would probably have been not suitable, and it's probably the reason why this didn't remain in educational use. I can assure the committee that we have worked very closely with colleagues in the education department, looking for suitable sites for additional educational provision. And we did a very exhaustive site search as part of our Planning for Schools DPD, which we adopted only a few years ago. And this was not a site that found its way onto our radar. But the policy in the London Plan goes beyond just education, that the range is quite broad. It includes health, it includes community, includes play facilities, includes youth facilities, early years, recreation, sports, faith, criminal justice, and emergency facilities. But notwithstanding that, the bar that the policy sets is quite high, because there has to then be a realistic prospect of some form of alternative use coming forward. So it may well be that you would go through that exercise and actually conclude there wasn't a viable concrete alternative. So I think, you know, that those are further considerations. I think I do agree with, I forget which councillor said it, that this is clearly a site which would have benefited from a site visit, and there's clearly some lack of clarity about whether our colleagues in the transport section did actually conduct a physical site visit. And I understand the issues around access. But it's also been pointed out that the swept path analysis has also been checked by not just our transport people, but by colleagues in the waste section as well. So I think it's a difficult one. I think it's for you, Chair, to provide some direction.
Okay. I hadn't opened it up for debate, but we are open up for debate at the moment. So I'm just wondering if there's any more contributions to the debate. I haven't had a deferral call, so I'm getting from signals from Councillor Ball that he may well be doing that right at this minute. So, Councillor Ball.
Yes, exactly. You read my mind. I mean, I think for reasons that have been stated by other members already, our deliberations in this matter would benefit from deferral. I mean, could we word it that we defer for a site visit if possible, but if that's not possible, the deferral would still give us the opportunity to check the measurements and to ask the applicant, you know, if they can supply any information about alternative uses that were, you know, that were looked at for the site. I think there's one more. What was I think there's one more thing that someone else mentioned that a deferral would be useful for.
Clarification on the report from the inspector.
Oh yes, of course. Yes, and for us to have the inspector's report in front of us clearly, and that's happened in many previous applications. That would be a very useful thing to have. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, right. I think that's eminently sensible, Councillor Ball. If we can't do a site visit, we get a proper measurement. We get some clarification on the inspector's report, and we get a better presentation or a virtual walkthrough if we can't do it, as we have on some applications before us in the last year. So you've proposed it, Councillor Ball. I'm going to put it to the committee whether they wish to defer on those grounds. So it's the and/or. If we can't do a site visit, we get some more information. We get someone to physically measure it, and we get a better walk through than we had tonight. So all those in favour of deferral for that reason? Well, and myself, so it's unanimous.
Chair, sorry, could I make a quick point? I know I'm not supposed to talk at this point, but can I suggest that the residents are also present with officers when the measurements are done, so that we, both sides are there and present, and it can feel like a bit of a...
Councillor Johan, I'd not say residents plural. If the officer could liaise with yourself and maybe get yourself and maybe one resident, I don't see any problem with that, but not residents en masse, if that's possible.
Yeah, happy with that, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so that's that. So we move on to what was item 1 on your agenda. Acton Gardens, phase 7.2, Belgrove Close, Acton. Okay, right. So the officer for this is Thiago. We can, thank you. Sorry? Okay, yeah. Thiago, are you ready to present? We do not have any speakers on this, so it's an officer presentation. It's for South Acton master plan. So go ahead, Thiago.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you, new Chairman, first of all. So this presentation concerns item 1 in your agenda, and it comprises a reserved matters application for plot 7.2 of the Acton Gardens Estate Regeneration Scheme. The item includes an application which seeks agreement for the detailed design for this particular plot of the 2018 master plan. Next slide, please. So the committee is reminded that permission for the site-wide regeneration of the South Acton estate was granted in 2013 and more recently in 2018 with the aim of delivering 49% of the homes as affordable housing. That's about 1,800 homes as affordable housing. So plots 9.2, 9.4, 8.1 and 8.2 of the master plan were the latest plots to receive committee approval in the last 2 years. Next slide, please. Plot 7.2 occupies a site area of just under an hectare and is located towards the northern section of the master plan boundary. It is the first phase to come forward within the Clarendon Gardens character area, and it will play a critical role in its definition in a modern interpretation of a typical London square. Next slide, please. Next one, please. Thank you. The site currently contains multiple apartment buildings that are between 4 to 11 stories. They are linked together with podium decks and walkways. The lower blocks have small rear garden spaces and there is open land between them to the south. One of the key characteristics of this site is the land levels that change very significantly across the plot. The Acton Town Tube Station is located to the west, and Acton High Street is some 5 minutes walk to the north. Next slide, please. The proposal is to demolish all the existing buildings and to provide a residential block ranging between 6 and 12 stories in height. The proposed built form is arranged around the central communal landscaped podium garden with car parking underneath. The building seeks to deliver 185 new apartments, including 44 active living homes, which are affordable rent for over 55s. So this is the first time we are introducing this product in the master plan, which is a requirement of the section 106. This will be combined with new residential amenity space and associated landscaping. Next slide, please. These diagrams show how the proposed massing in relation to the approved 2018 master plan parameter plans work. So as it can be seen, the massing has been developed entirely within the parameters, and it provides a variation in scale and mass to create visual variety to the street scene. Next slide, please. The proposals would provide high-quality residential accommodation that meets and exceeds the mayor's internal space standards. In terms of the affordable provision, the development would include 69 units in a London affordable rent tenure, 18 units in shared ownership, and 98 units in open market. This is equivalent to just over 49.5% affordable housing on an habitable room basis, which in itself is split 81% London affordable rent and 19% shared ownership. 10%, as usual, 10% of the new homes are designed to be fully wheelchair accessible, and the remaining 90% are designed to be wheelchair adaptable homes. Next slide, please. As shown in this diagram, the design seeks to ensure that there is no distinguishable difference between the appearances of the various tenures of accommodation, whereby the same high-quality design, same finishes, and shared landscaping is provided across the plot and master plan, regardless of the tenure. As such, the permission continues, this application will continue to assist the regeneration program and continue to help to rehouse the existing secure tenants that wish to remain within the estate. Next slide, please. As per the 2018 master plan, consent, the redevelopment at a higher density is proposed. As discussed, the site layout and distribution of massing follows the parameters and principles of the consented approach. The design of the building itself, in particular along the new urban edges, will improve urban definition to Avenue Road, which at the moment is very permeable, add rhythm and good articulation. Next slide, please. Which is achieved through the use of layered facades combined with consistent building lines and a restricted but contrasting palette of materials. So this is the emerging street scene in Avenue Road, which is one of the primary arteries within the master plan. Next slide, please. In terms of amenity, every apartment is provided with a balcony or with a terrace or garden. And the court area is accessible from all cores and to all residents, as discussed previously. There is also a dedicated active living garden, which is that bubble in the central picture, the layout of the podium, which is situated outside of the active living communal tea room area. And it is designed to provide seating and raised planters for gardening activities aimed at the active living occupants. In terms of children's play, an informal approach is proposed with a total area equating to some 725 square meters. Children doorstep play is also provided along the Avenue Road frontage of the site, where a play on the way rain trail leads to an explorer trail through a pocket park on the southeastern corner of the block. These features have been specifically included as part of the application as to provide a link between the two garden areas, so the existing Avenue Park and Clarendon Gardens that will sit to the north of the building. So next slide, please. Clarendon Gardens is a new park within Acton Gardens, which is to be delivered later on alongside plot 7.5. The land morphology in this area presents a 6-meter level change from the west to the east and north. Because of this, it was necessary to divide the new route along the north of the block into 2 sections. So this is a kind of an innovative approach. So the first to the west, the side to the west on the north side of the building, alongside the north side of the building, is provided with stepped access, whilst the second section to the east side of that particular road is provided with a shared surface road with level access for pedestrian and emergency vehicles only. So due to the use of steps and steep inclines, this route would not achieve the 1 in 21 gradient required to provide level access along the entire length of the northern boundary. Given that this level access cannot be achieved, an alternative route, which is there shown in the diagram in red across Clarendon Gardens, has been designed to provide inclusive access for all. The key parameters required to deliver this inclusive access across the Clarendon Gardens have been secured as part of the reconciliation mechanism. Next slide, please. Plot 7.2 would also house the energy center that will supply the district heating network for the estate and allows for existing and future phases to connect to a centralized energy source. The original master plan energy strategy relied heavily on gas boilers, and we had to re-examine it with a view to reduce reliance on this older technology and incorporate air source heat pumps into the network, which are significantly more sustainable. The heat network has been designed as a sealed system, and because the dwellings are not using the actual network hot water for human consumption, there will be no Legionella risk. That's another advantage to the new system. Next slide, please. The geometry of the plot has been considered to ensure good levels of connectivity whilst ensuring safe circulation for pedestrians, obviously, with all new streets designed for 20-mile-per-hour circulation. These secondary routes to either side of the block there would be oriented north-south and would connect from Avenue Road through future phases to later link with Acton High Street to the north. Car parking would be provided at a ratio of 0.29 spaces per unit, with the majority of these to be secured either on street or within the undercroft of the building. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide. In conclusion, plot 7.2 is an instrumental plot in the context of the overall master plan, and it seeks to resolve the morphology of the land and provide the cues that will help define the Clarendon Gardens character area. The building within this plot will also house the energy center that will supply the district heating network for the master plan and present a turning point in the sustainability credentials of this estate. In addition to the 49.5% affordable housing provision, a total of £442,000 in Section 106 contributions towards pedestrian, road safety, education, sustainability measures, amongst other things, will be triggered as part of the proposals for this plot. No objections and one letter of support were received from members of the public, and there were no adverse comments from any other internal or external consultees. There is a briefing note for these items, but this note only clarifies the fire strategy and confirms the resilience of the building design against public health emergencies like COVID-19. As such, it is recommended that permission is granted for this application in accordance with the recommendation set out in the report. That concludes the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Tiago. Councillor Conti, you indicate first.
Just a question on parking. So 2 points really. I think it's 26 of the parking space can have electric charging points. I think sort of looking forward, and obviously the idea of phasing out petrol and diesel cars for over the next 10 to 15 years, why aren't all of them going to be electric charging points? I would have thought that would, to future-proof this development and the parking space, and actually potentially act as an encouragement for people to either get plug-in hybrid or electric cars. That may be something. And in terms of the 54 parking spaces being provided for the 185 units, how's that going to be allocated? Is it whoever turns up first on the night can use those parking spaces, or are certain ones going to be linked to certain units?
I mean, as my previous colleague has mentioned, what we set out is 20% of the parking spaces are provided with active charging points, and the other 80% are provided with infrastructure to set up those charging points in the later or when required in the future. That is happening in the areas surrounding the master plan. It's not happening within the estate itself, but it's something that we have to definitely start to push to be provided more widely, especially on streets. As normally these spaces are being, these electric charging points are being provided within the undercroft of the buildings. So we want to expand that obviously and roll it out to the on streets. But the condition is in the master plan, and it requires that 100% of the infrastructure is available and it can be implemented at some point. Now, in terms of the allocations, the Section 106 prevents new residents from applying for car parking permits. So existing residents, in our commitment to not provide a worse off position than they have currently, are entitled to a parking space. So that those residents are entitled to a parking permit. New residents are only entitled to a parking permit when that is available through private ownership. So you would have to purchase one, I suppose.
Tiago, does that include residents returning to the estate? as existing, or are they counted as new?
Well, existing or returning if they had to leave the estate because of the decanting arrangements. So if there was no housing at the time of demolition of those properties and they are returning later on, they are entitled to the parking spaces.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask about the solar panels, first of all? Who's going to be the real beneficiary of the solar panels and the energy produced by them? Is it just going to be a case of it's just used by the developer to provide maybe communal lighting or whatever, or is it actually going to be a benefit to the residents? Are they actually going to enjoy the energy as well? And how are we going to look at it if there's excess energy for what the developer needs? Is there going to be some way maybe people could purchase it? Maybe the residents themselves. And also, if I can ask about the play space, it does concern me sometimes that this does come up, that there is a suggestion of there being inadequate play space for the children. And we look at it in terms of, well, maybe there are other sites around, maybe there are other parks around where the children can play. It does actually concern me, well, are these other parks, are these other sites already allocated for other children at other flats or whatever? So are we sure that there is going to be adequate play space for those children that come along? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the solar panels, I understand the skepticism. We have been around for a while and we know how inefficient they can be. To the extent that some of them are actually turned off and no one realizes. So it is indeed a problem that we are aware of. In this particular case, the solar panels will be used to operate the air source heat pumps to make them even more efficient. So these air source heat pumps will rely on normal energy rather than gas. And a substantial part of that requirement for that kind of source is coming from the photovoltaics. So they will be intimately connected to the air source heat pump. So it will not be used for anything else in this instance because they will be at their most efficient if they are connected to the air source heat pumps. It's something that I still have to get my head around, but it appears for every 2 kilowatts of energy that we put into these air source heat pumps, we will be able to extract 2.38 kilowatts of heat. So I don't know how we are extracting more than we are putting in. Seems to challenge the laws of Lavoisier, but well, I will try to learn.
When you find out, can you tell the committee?
And about the play space as well.
Play space.
Oh, yes, exactly. Sorry. In terms of the play space, indeed, there is a small shortfall within the podium. So if I'm correct, the shortfall is about 110 square meters from what would normally be required to be provided within the podium. But this is a high density area and the podium is being shared with a number of other competing users. We feel like in this particular case, it is acceptable to accept this shortfall because of the actual. If we could go back to the slide, I'm actually. It's slide 11, please. Just outside the building itself, right in front alongside Avenue Road, there will be incorporated into the urban drainage system, the sustainable urban drainage system. There will be a trail, so we call it a trail, play as you go along, where all the water will be collected, and that whole area will be played by the children. I just recently became familiar with Gothenburg, that this seems to be developing a concept of a rain city where people interact with the rain in a more playful manner. It's quite funny that we were already developing these concepts here in a similar fashion. Is it possible to push back to the slide 11? It's just. And
If it helps, it's on page 57 and 58 of the report.
Yes, it will be there as well. And at the end of that trail, you also have like a very steep area that we actually managed to create a playful area for the kids to entertain themselves. There was a little bit of a discussion on whether it should be an area more aimed at the over 55s, bearing in mind that's where they are, the entrance to their block is located. But due to antisocial behavior, it was felt like something more playful and more engaging would be a more interesting solution. So the trail, we were on the correct one. So we went to the, yeah. So on the left-hand side at the bottom, you have a section of how that public space in front of the block alongside Avenue Road will work. You can see that that middle section incorporates a SUD and a play area. So we are maximizing the opportunities for play space outside. Now, the building is sandwiched in between two new parks, Avenue Park that is currently existing, but will include a substantial area of play space, and Clarendon Gardens that will do the same. Also, not just for the building, but also to serve the high street due to the proximity to that particular commercial area. So I think we will be all right in terms of play space for the whole master plan. But we also have a reconciliation mechanism associated with this master plan where we keep tabs on how much we are meeting the targets for play space amongst other targets that we have set out during the master plan permission. So with every phase, we know exactly how far we are off that target or whether we are meeting that target. So that is applicable to affordable housing or the Section 106 contributions or play space or the number of family homes. So we have a good idea of how the scheme is progressing, and I can give you details of that if you wish separately. Yeah.
Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We welcome this development. I understand that we have been working this South Acton estate step by step, and the whole area has been regenerated. But in terms of this 7.2, plot 7.2 we are discussing, as you know that, you might know that Berrymead Primary School and surrounding area is a very, one of the deprived part of the London, possibly in the country. So once we are doing that type of regeneration, and we are talking about Section 106, how do you think it could be changed, the deprivation of the local area, and how it could be this huge regeneration will be beneficial to improve the local schools and local deprivation?
As part of the master plan permission, we secure the very significant contribution towards education. So in the hope that we can provide the number of school places that will be commensurate with the population increase within the area. So that has been established at master plan level, and on a phase by phase or in an incremental or gradual way, we will get to the point where each phase, as we get to increase that population, we get the payments to provide for those school places. But I think what you're trying to say is that we are trying to achieve a balanced community within that area. And in terms of having a deprived local spot, that by having a more balanced and mixed community, that we achieve more inclusive society, community. I think the master plan is trying to deliver that, and that's why we have the target of 50% affordable, 50% private, as to ensure that we try to balance to achieve a balanced and mixed community in the area. Does that respond, Councillor? I don't know.
I think that was a comprehensive answer to a comprehensive question. Thank you. think that was fine. The answer was
Thank you.
fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
I just wanted to ask about the carbon emissions. And it says in the report there's a 35% reduction based on, well, I'm not sure what it means by Part L 2013 baseline, but I thought we were trying to be a bit more ambitious than that. And although that's a welcome reduction, there seems quite a wide gap between that and what we were hoping for, which I think was 0 emissions. So just if you could explain why they've got to that figure and if there's anything else we can do to make that increase.
I mean, I think we will see those numbers improve with time, especially as the energy center is implemented and the district heating network is spread out to connect all the previous phases and future phases in the master plan. But at the moment, that's the requirement, and that's all the applicant is required to meet at this stage. So we have that ambition, but for now, we don't have the policy or the legal backup to push any further than that. Although this district heating network and this revision of the energy strategy will certainly deliver an improvement on those numbers. We will be seeing that very, very shortly.
Okay. I don't see any more questions from, just as I say that, Councillor Conti pops up.
I forgot to ask it earlier. In the report, it's about that there's some private gardens for some of the units on the ground floor and duplex. Are they for the private properties? Are they are some of the affordable rent properties going to have private gardens? What's the split? What was the split of that? It's just.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I had it on my presentation and actually took it out just to make it a little bit shorter. But all the maisonettes, basically that are provided at ground floor and first floor, are provided with private gardens or terraces. So the way the block is set out is a perimeter block, and each block has a type of tenure. So all tenures will benefit equally from access to those private balconies, private terraces or gardens. So normally those maisonettes will probably have a garden at the front, so leading to the front door, and then on the podium they will have a separate section that is almost like abutting the courtyard within the perimeter block. Yeah.
Okay, I think all questions have been answered very well. And okay, I'm opening up for debate. I'm not sensing there's keen interest for debate on this, but if anyone wants to come in, otherwise I will go straight to the vote. Councillor Woodruff.
Well, I think it's quite a good advance, really. I think so. It's, you know, it seemed, I looked through it and I thought I was, you know, it was good stuff, really. I'm particularly fascinated. It's based on the Soapsud Island history of Acton, which I presume is because they used to have lots of laundries in Acton. It says the podium the layout is in a bubble theme, and I was thinking last year bubbles mean something completely different. I've got different views about what bubbles are, but no, I thought it was generally quite a good proposal, really.
Yes, soap suds, not soap boxes, right?
I mean, yes, maybe subliminal that played the role. I don't know. Maybe as we were all thinking about bubbles, but we are trying to ensure that the design is in one way or the other connected to the area in some form or the other. And you can see that the buildings are starting to incorporate quite a lot of banding, horizontal banding, as a way of reflecting some of the cues that we take from the designs on Acton High Street, as a way of connecting and reinforcing local
okay,
local characteristics. I mean, we still try to incorporate that.
Right, I can't see anyone else wanting to contribute. Are the committee happy that we go straight to the vote? Okay, right. So all those in favour of this development, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. And it just leaves me to wind up the meeting. Thank you very much, Thiago.
Thank you,
what I
Chair.
didn't-
Thank you very much.
Thank you. What I didn't mention was Councillor Mahmood is now the Vice Chair of Planning and should be congratulated on that. And we should say thank you to the former Chair, Councillor Manro, and the former Vice Chair, Councillor Donnelly, who are now elevated to higher ranks than the Planning Committee. So, but thank you very much to all.
And well done to yourself for chairing a meeting at such short notice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.